You came here at 10:20, and this is all I had to say, so I'm done. It's great.
Well, I thought first maybe we could just introduce ourselves. Everybody.
First,
right?
This is clearly second.
Second after the evangelize, make sure you bring everybody to Journey Live. There you go. So everybody knows
I'm Austin. I'm loud and annoying.
And my name's Eric Snoza. I'm the double bassist and programs manager for Fifth House Ensemble, the chamber music group that will be performing for Journey Live.
I'm Patrick O'Malley. I'm the arranger of Journey Live and sometimes conductor and also a composer at large.
I'm Danny Cohen. I am the operations and marketing director for Fifth House Ensemble.
And I'm Eric Heidbreder. I'm the bassoonist with Fifth House Ensemble.
So we kind of wanted to keep this, I guess, just basically pretty informal. We didn't have any specific agenda. We'd love to get questions from you and kind of tell you a little bit about the process or any questions you had about it. Yes? How are we doing?
We're going to find out.
We're just all going to play whatever we want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
All the lights are going to be off. It's going to be a really cool setting.
It's be very meditative. So I can kind of get the ball rolling on that, because this was something that I had fantasized about even before finishing the score, because it was clear that the game was linear enough that something like this could possibly work, but I wasn't sure how to do it. And then, life's busy, and it was, it's a massive undertaking, because it's a full concert. It's the one piece is the whole show. So you have to, put a lot of time and energy into it. It's like writing an opera or something, where you just have to, because the thing that is hard to impress upon, people without having to go through this really long, elaborate explanation, is that the music that I wrote for the game isn't like sitting in this nice, neat pile of sheet music that we can then just sort of distribute and then perform, because it's so deeply interactive in-game that it's all split up into all these different components. And for example, if there's a section of the game where I need the orchestra, but only for a few measures, and all the rest of it's being played, like by a solo harp or something, I don't have one master conductor score that has all of that on there. It's all separate, because it's just I don't know. I don't know that I would do that now, because I've realized how insanely inefficient it is later when trying to reconstruct it. But that's how it was. All the music, because every little moment in the game is pretty precisely scored, so that as a result, the game just keeps up with you no matter what you're doing. So yeah, it took kind of the initiative of these guys collectively, and Patrick specifically, to figure out, because I was really busy, but I wanted to be super involved, and so I said, I need somebody to kind of forensically dissect because remember, some of this music I wrote 7 years ago, and so I needed someone to go through like my old files, and hope that the software is like still compatible, and like this detective start reconstructing it, and in addition to that, also in the process rearranging it for the fact that Fifth House is a different ensemble than what was originally recording. It's not like recreating it to then do exactly the same way we did it with, full string orchestra and solo this, solo that, blah, blah. It's like they're a different lineup. It dovetails, but it's really not the same. Mm-hmm. So.
And maybe Patrick, you can go into a little bit about your process.
I can talk about like the actual process of making the arrangement. I think the first thing I did before I even met with Austin to figure how we were going to do this, the first thing I did was I tried to transcribe as many of the cutscene music by ear, just to force myself to delve into the music. And then eventually, Austin and I had a meeting for a couple hours at his studio where we went through the entire game, and he told me where all the changes are, where all the transitions are, and then just gave me every single digital performer file and PDF of sheet music that he had that he could find. And then I slowly but surely started the process of using the digital performer files to see all the MIDI data and transcribe that into traditional notation, but also starting to make systems of what instruments would replace which synthesized sound, which instruments would replace non-Western instruments that Austin had used. And it surprisingly wasn't too hard to kind of find a routine to approach every single cue and get it done. And of course, I knew the instrumentation was going to be Fifth House, which is it's 12 people we have playing, I think. So, yeah, it was. So basically, I would, start a finale file, open up Austin's DP file, and then just fill in the blanks, slowly but surely.
And of course, the big trick is figuring out how to be able to make these on-the-fly changes, because our whole thing is, there's been a lot of talk about the group Bit Brigade, who's here at MAGFest, right? Because they have this awesome show where someone plays like Contra or something, and they kind of like play a score of sorts as in perfect sync, and it's this like amazing feat of choreography. But it's kind of the exact opposite of what we're doing, because we really want the player to just be a player, and we are writing the score, we are performing the score as if we were coming from the game, exactly the way it's done in game, or nearly exactly. Very, very few compromises for the sake of live performance had to be made. And there were things that would not be worth it. Like, for example, if you play the game, you can obviously play online or not. So the score actually changes. Most people don't realize that, but the score is actually different if you're connected or not. And it's not only is the score looking at not only is it asking the question, are you connected with some other player, it's also asking the question, how far away physically are you from them? And it makes adjustments to the music based on the data it's getting from that. There's that's such minutia that's not part of the we basically do the full version. We are performing whether they're going to be connected to someone or not, and hopefully they will, because we got the build to be able to connect to the PlayStation Network. Because I have this fantasy image of some guy at home playing and not aware that on the other end there's like this entire room full of hundreds of people. And so I can't remember what the PSN tag, the PSN ID is for our build.
It's Journey Live.
Is it Journey Live? Okay, so they'll know at the
Yes.
end,
Yeah.
holy shit. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and from the performer's perspective, this is awesome, because normally as a chamber music group, we're performing without a conductor. So we're constantly having this nonverbal communication going back and forth, which is great. But the only way that we could do this is with a conductor and somebody that intimately knows the game and what's going on and can kind of guide us through it. And so it provides some interesting challenges for us too, because as both these guys said, there's a lot of markers within the game. So we've reduced the thousands that were in there originally to dozens that we now have. So we have to be constantly reading the music, but also watching them, because they may say, oh, he skipped this part, so we got to go to here, or no, he went backwards, so we got to go to here. So we're constantly on the lookout and also trying to emote at the same time so we can do the game justice.
But the awesome thing is that I'm actually able to do the score better in certain ways than it is in game, because this is all music that's actually being performed live, whereas in the game, it's all these pre-recorded elements that have to kind of beautifully crossfade, and you work out all these transitions, and you work so hard to try to mask the seams so that it sounds like a continuous performance. But because I know it so well, I can easily make awkward, I could intentionally sort of, step over the line that I know will trigger the music to change, and I could do it deliberately at the most musically awkward moment where you would hear, oh, yeah, I heard the edit, I heard it happen. But that's not, they just start playing a different thing. And so it's actually happening the way it was always in my mind, of just this continuous unfolding of music. So it's weirdly the most perfect version in a certain sense that it could ever have been, which is something that only occurred to me way late into this process. So I was like, oh wow, this changes it. I hate video games.
Any other questions, please?
How's the actual, is this sheet music that you guys know, okay, we're going to be jumping to this cue, and you have hand signals, or is it
That's exactly it.
Yes.
software that you're changing things and you're creating the sheet music on an iPad?
Yes and yes. So
yeah.
we have all the sheet music, and it was constructed and choreographed beautifully so that we can make these jumps. We're also going to involve hand signals.
Yes. Basically, if you wanted to do this project entirely from paper parts and a paper score, we are doing a paper score, you can. Fifth House likes to use iPads because they're convenient.
We're geeks.
They're cooler and they say paper, but there's no electronic cueing of different sections or anything. The conductor does
We
that.
did talk about it.
We talked about it, but I think we ended up, saying we could do this with just one.
Yeah.
And at first glance, I thought it would have to be like the conductor score, and where I'm actually literally changing what's on their parts from the score. But that's actually like way unnecessary. As
Yeah.
complicated as it is, it's actually quite doable, even if everyone's just turning pages.
Yeah,
They have to know their parts. The thing is, I have this fantasy of scaling this to a full orchestra. But you'd need like twice as many rehearsals as an orchestra typically would give, because they have to know this music really. Like, they've already spent a lot of time before showing up here to MAGFest learning this music, and that's just one of the nice things about chamber music is, you get a lot more rehearsal time, and it lets you get more ambitious.
So the music's, the way we do it is surprisingly traditional, more than you would think, and than we assumed that we would have to do.
Right. But because we've got lots of paper, obviously we don't have time to start going back and forth. So that's one of the other reasons we prefer iPad, because Fourscore, which is the app that we're using on the iPad, allows us to use a Bluetooth foot pedal so that we can go back and forth between the pages without having to use our hands.
Which is pretty snazzy.
Yeah. But any other questions, please?
How on earth do you rehearse for something like this?
Well, for this particular thing, we needed a conductor to just kind of go through from beginning to end to see how things sound. And then we started identifying where some of these jumps could be, where we just need to be paying attention. We kind of went over the hand signals. And then, to be honest, we had to bring in, is he still here?
No,
he's
I don't
not
think
here.
he's still here.
We actually had to bring in a gamer, and fortunately, as part of our Kickstarter campaign, one of our local Chicago guys, he came in, and we just set down the PS4 right in front of him with the game. We turned on the sound effects so that we could hear what it was going to be like as well. But there's really no other way to do it after we've kind of gone through the initial stages than to just have a gamer there and go through it.
The guy is named Viking Jesus, and he's awesome. He does like metal covers of game music, and he
when you
looks
see
the
him, it
part.
makes
He's
sense.
got like the big beard, and the dude's awesome. And yeah, I first met him at a video games live show where he was playing on stage, and he had just discovered Journey, and so yeah, he jumped on board to this thing straight away.
And it was hilarious the first time. I don't know if you guys saw the interview of him on our Facebook page, but he's obviously played the game before, and he was fairly excited about it. But you have the chamber musicians, and there's 12 of us, and then he's literally sitting right next to the conductor. And so the music is there is no more better surround sound than what he got right there. And he's sitting right in the middle of us, and we start playing, and the first notes of the cello, and then the percussion comes in, just that opening, which is gorgeous. And he looked at me, and he looked at us, and he just had this shit-eating grin on his face. And this big burly guy with this big beard, and you could just see like tears starting to well up in his face because he's just the experience. And then I was looking at him, and then I start welling up, like, I gotta read the music. But it was.
Yeah, he wrote on Twitter like 5 seconds after the rehearsal ended. He said, "This is the best way to play a video game." I was like, that's not the most scalable. It's an incredibly inefficient model, but it is probably the best way to play a game.
They do need those jobs, though.
Right. It's $10 extra to order the band that comes with the game.
Yeah,
It's an app add-on.
yeah, yeah.
You were talking about worrying about like skips and whatnot, depending on what he does. Have you like rehearsed him at all in terms of where he goes, or are you just giving him free reign?
That's the whole point. Is no, we are not prescribing to them. We did hold a contest because we figured there'd be a lot of people who would want to be the player, and it's going to hand off periodically through the game. But I specifically told them, I'm looking for style, the way that you play, and mainly one that's built around this empathy of recognizing that there's going to be hopefully hundreds of people watching, and you want to kind of play with an acknowledgement that you're entertaining them as much as you are playing the game. But the distinction doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be a particularly large modification of your natural behavior as a gamer. We also wanted to make sure it was someone who wouldn't just get lost. It's possible for the game to be like 3.5 hours long if you're really lost, or like it's your first time playing it, but you're also a completionist who has to go find it. And it's like, unfortunately, we just can't we'll get kicked out of that room before then. So we wanted somebody, but we truly do want it to be fully, authentically live, so we have not dictated anything. Now, here's where Journey itself does us a huge favor. It's a fairly linear game. It's actually a very linear game. There is only so much they can do. You know, this is not Fallout, where it's like 90 hours later, we still haven't gotten to the first queue. So the game itself is very well predisposed to this concept.
And that being said, we did experience that when Mike was first playing. He actually at one point went backwards in the game. It was during one of the last mountain scenes, and he was just going the wrong way. It's actually one of the hardest parts in the score, so we're just hammering away, and we're going nuts, and we just don't stop because he went the wrong way, and so we're prepared for it.
Yeah, I figure we will have, like, if like the worst should happen in that way, then at some point we would, I guess, have to intervene. But the music is laid out to be able to handle that. For sure. It's just a matter of like, well, it's almost 4. And, or these guys are like, yeah, it's literally the most physically exhausting moment in the score where that's possible to happen, which is very sadistic on the composer's part.
It was, actually.
Composer and arranger both.
Yeah.
Because at least in the context of the original score, it's a full orchestra playing aleatorically, which is much easier because they can lay back and there's
Rest.
still like 8 people nearby doing the same thing. But
Yeah.
here, everyone's there in all the time.
Nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
Nowhere to hide.
But I like it because that's my moment, so
Yeah,
I'm good.
Yeah.
I can play that forever.
that's his solo.
That's true. That's true.
No. Yeah, I was paying Mike the whole time to just
Yeah.
to stay there.
Yeah, exactly. Go, yeah.
But what's really neat about it is for the gamer too is that they'll start to notice that they're actually as much a chamber musician as the people on stage, because they're controlling us in the same way that we act as chamber musicians, where we're kind of guiding or like indicating to another person this is kind of what we want to do. So they get to tell us, okay, maybe I want the score to do this, or maybe I want to go here, and so there's very much a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, as a conductor, I'm basically just relaying their behavior to these guys. I'm not actually like in charge, and so they are, which is their normal relationship as a gamer, right? Like when you're playing the game, that's very much your role, but you don't think about it because you know there's other things hopefully holding your attention.
Right.
But that's very much the case. My fantasy was always that it should feel like while you're playing a game, but especially a game like Journey, that I am standing over your shoulder composing the music in real time through some kind of black magic sorcery in perfect sync with whatever it is that you're doing, such that it just seems to match exactly what you were thinking, and we have this unspoken bond. That's always what I want it to feel like. And the cool thing is that this is kind of that, because the music is like literally being made. You know, they're playing and they're sort of feeling this thing, and they look over and it's like, oh, that cellist is right there. It's very cool.
No. Anything else, please? Yeah.
Are you going to do I Was Born for this and do a vocalist?
Yes and yes. She just left, but we will. I can't promise that I'm going to time it precisely the exact duration of the end credits the way that it is. But yes, and Laura Intravia will be singing it, who has sung it as part of the Video Games Live Tour a million times, and she was, I've worked with her a lot. I love her. We did a piano album that's Journey, the highlights from Journey all rearranged for solo piano. That's available as a book of sheet music and as a piano, recording. And she sang it for that album, and so she knows it better than anyone. She knows it better than the original singer who actually sang it, Lisbeth Scott, on the actual game. And by good fortune, she was gonna be here anyway, because otherwise it was gonna be like, okay, well, we gotta find a singer. And they have singers, and I have some in LA that I was thinking about, hauling out here. And then she said, I'm gonna be MAGFest. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. And because it's such a special thing, we'd love to vary the singers. And we have one that we were working with that's recorded at this point, who on our last project with Fifth House, we worked with this Israeli Mediterranean folk band called Baladino, and Yael Badesh is their lead singer, and she's just amazing voice. So that's going to be recorded, and we'll be performing that back in Chicago.
Are you a singer? There was like a loaded
There's like
question
please,
vibe
is
in
it
that.
open?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, next time. But yeah. So yes, we will be. In other words.
I apologize if someone's asked this already because I came in late. Sorry. But in the process of developing this idea and
it's certainly changed the way I think about writing concert music. It makes me not want to write linear concert music ever again. So just heads up.
Yeah, hey. I'm
And
ready.
because it's something I've wanted to do for a long time. I mean, it's one of those, I definitely wanted to use it as like the training ground for the techniques for interactive live concert music, because I have a 1,000-point list sort of idea vomit log of things to explore there. As for translating it back into games, I'm sure that over time the answer to that will be yes. The thing is, every game is so different in how you sort out the answers to these questions. Like on Assassin's Creed Syndicate, for example, the problems posed for an interactive music system are radically different than a game like Journey. And like I did a game called The Banner Saga, which is unlike both of those, et cetera, et cetera. And that's part of why I love games, is every single game I do, I have to start from scratch. And it's like being a little kid and just absorbing new information. And I really do love that. So yeah, everything teaches you techniques. But this, if nothing else, this will just make me envy this process while doing games where I can't just be like, well, look, guys, like I'm just going to look at you and we're going to just jump to measure 27. Like the game will not know how to do that no matter what. It's just going to drive me crazy.
And from a performer's perspective, we're really excited about that because one of the biggest barriers that we run into is that stupid fourth wall. It's like, how do we connect with our audiences? And so when we march out there, 100 of us in our penguin suits with this conductor sitting at the front, and we play this really amazing old music, there's just seems like that wall, and we're not really connecting with the audiences unless they're part of that like 3% of the public that's educated about this music already. So this is that next step that kind of breaks down that wall. We're inviting the audience to participate in the music making process.
Yeah.
Somebody else had their hand up. No? Yes.
To the violinist in third row.
Yes. Yes. I think first off, there's this inherent love for it. I mean, as a musician, like the second you sit down and you're playing a piece of music that you love, the juices get flowing. So that automatically helps. If I was having to play through an opera that I hated that was 3 hours long, that would be a different case. But when it's music that you love, the juices are flowing and you feel pretty good. I think the great thing about the way that Austin wrote it is that, and the particular scene that I'm thinking of, where we're all just kind of going nuts, if you're listening to each other, you can kind of see, okay, Kareen, our cellist, she's getting a little tired. I'm going to like juice up a little bit so she can take a rest. And then she'll know that I've been playing for like 5 minutes. I can't do this anymore. So she's like, you know what, I'll juice it up. And so we just kind of weave in and out of the texture so that you don't really notice it, but we're getting just a little bit of rest now and then. But for the most part, the score is open enough where as long as we're just focused physically, we'll be all right.
Well, and also the way Patrick arranged it, was a pretty limited palette compared to if it was like a big full orchestra, for example. But even within that, it doesn't just like hammer every single person the whole way through. It gets pretty sparse. I mean, Journey does that on its own even before the arrangement, but he retained that really well so that it's not like, of course, cello and bass flute and whatnot have their work cut out for them just by nature of the beast, but it moves around enough that it's not actually 2 hours of this for any one person.
Right.
And of course, the soundtrack itself has these little breaks between cues.
Yeah, and there are actual moments of silence in the game.
That allow,
There's that as well.
the players to catch their breath, which I think is really important.
Oh yeah, yeah. Basically, every sort of stage, the music always stops as a way to communicate. Like you're done, you can move on. Just as a subtle way to, provide some sort of feedback. And those moments are
All of them.
well received, when they come along.
Well, and it's beautiful too because in any piece of music, you have to have rest. It's never just constant notes. I mean, the rests are a part of the music.
Oh yeah, music has no meaning without silence on either
No,
side,
exactly.
for sure. I saw another hand somewhere. Yeah.
Oh, a section that I like. Well, Deuce, I think you have one.
Well, I mean, the resurrection scene is like just such a powerful moment. And for us, it's so cathartic because we just got through this like heavy section of just like really grinding and like focusing, and it's like the hardest thing where we're switching from back and forth, and then we just get to and we're all just like, oh, and I'm gonna start crying.
Yeah.
We'll just get it out of the air.
It's gonna
now.
happen.
It's gonna happen, and that's, I mean, exactly, and we're all gonna like get together and hug afterward. But I mean, that's easily my favorite moment, is that like cathartic experience of we made it, you know, through this whole section as well, and we're all there together. It's
That's a solid first for sure. I think the second one in mind would be just the very opening. That opening cello solo is just stunning. And the second that the percussion just kind of drops in with these subtle bells and stuff, it's great. Gets me every time. Mm-hmm. Yes.
When you guys are first given material from the game company, what's the first thing that pops into mind? Is it instrumentation? Is it certain modes? Is it melody? Is it chord changes? What's the
Yeah. I know it sounds like a cop-out answer, but no two are the same. And because also where they are in their process dramatically varies from one game to the next. You know, like on Journey, the piece that he was just saying, those very kind words, thank you, about Nascence, the first track on the soundtrack album, track 1, that also plays on the cross-media bar if you just hover over the game before you launch it. I wrote that the day they told me about the game. This was 7 years ago. Genova Chen, the creative director, said, I'm going to tell you about this game we're going to do, and I'd love for you to think about it and come up with a theme of some kind that can kind of help us all sort of agree on the tone, like give us all this common flagpole that we can all sort of rally around as we start to build up our initial concept art and we build our first prototypes. I mean, we're talking before there was even concept art. But it was one of those rare instances where it just hit me immediately. I had the piece that moment. I mean, I literally walked from my where we were sitting to my car to drive back to my studio, and I left myself a voicemail while walking to my car saying, okay, start with cello going na 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 na, and then bass flute, and I literally got off the phone, or I finished the voicemail to myself, then called my cellist, called my flute player, and said, can you meet me in the studio in like 2 hours? I need 90 minutes of that to drive there, because I'm going from Santa Monica to Burbank, and it's Los Angeles, which means that it's like 10 miles you spend 90 minutes driving. And then I needed 30 minutes to actually write out the parts and do like a very quick just structuring of it, and then I mocked up these, like a string orchestra to accompany them, and the piece literally never changed in 3 years of working on it, and it was one of those that game company then used that to start building concept art and things like that. Now, Assassin's Creed Syndicate, they'd been working on the game for 3 years or something like that before they hired me. Now, I still had a year, and I could even integrate into the writing of the game and things like that, but they've made a lot of big decisions already by the time I get there. So a lot of my job is like finding my place within the kind of available terrain that's left. And some games are even more. I did a game that none of you have heard of or played called Horn. I'm assuming no one here is familiar with Horn.
I've heard of it. I know it.
Well, yes. If only Kristen were in here, the oboe player, who did a cover of the music I wrote for that, and I was blown away because I was like, how did you even hear about this? And she did an amazing job. Horn was an iOS game, it was an iPad game, where they literally brought me in a month before launch. So I had a month to write close to an hour and record, like with orchestra, close to an hour of music. And so obviously everything about the game was decided. And I just was scoring it. It was almost more like scoring a film, not logistically, it was still very much a game score, but in a film you very often are brought in at the very last second as well. And obviously the script is done, but it's shot, it's mostly edited. You're there to kind of plug in the gaps. So I love to be in as early as possible, including on films. Like my favorite thing ever is writing music for them to play back on set while they're shooting. Even though I'll end up changing it all later, because once you see the footage, you realize, oh, that was all bullshit, none of that works. But it's integrating into the production as a filmmaker is one of my great joys. It's not that common. In games, it's much more so, but it really does run the full gamut. That was every possible answer to that question. Anything else? Oh, sorry, we want to say something?
No, please. Yes.
Yes.
So for Fifth House Ensemble, our core instrumentation is woodwind quintet, so flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, French horn, and then one on each string, so violin, viola, cello, bass, and piano. And for this particular score, we had to bring in also a harpist and a percussionist.
And the pianist also is occasionally tasked with playing percussion.
Yes.
Or text.
Yeah. It was a fun new skill to learn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, piano player plays bass drum. Yeah, yeah. So it's a true string quartet.
Yeah, we call it the real string quartet.
Yeah, exactly. Violin, viola, cello.
But
bass.
it's neat with, we love our particular ensemble for a lot of reasons, but one is that when we get our full dectet, because you're filling out pretty much the full timbral palette of the orchestra, it can sound quite substantial, even though there's only 10 people on stage. So I think you're going to get the full effect of this score.
Especially this score, because I didn't use, like, your only sort of blind spot is if you wanted like burly low brass, right? You have no tubas or trombones or trumpets. But those are conveniently not part of Journey anyway.
Yeah.
You know, now the Banner Saga live will
That
be
would
a
be
problem.
that would be difficult. Yeah.
But this, yeah, it's pretty awesome. And it's fun hearing French horn randomly pop in the texture here and there, because that really strikes me as so outside of my mental image of Journey, and yet, I mean, you know, Patrick did an awesome job. It fits great, especially the muted moments and things where it's like kind of taking the place of some weird synth that was there before. It's fun. Yeah.
Thinking about instrumentation makes me remember that there's some like really memorable, kind of weird like sound design elements in Journey as well, like environmental like creature sounds, something like that. Did you think about like reinterpreting those with instruments?
Did you guys simultaneously raise your hand with the same question? So Sony facilitated there's a developer called Tricky Pixels in the UK that did the PS4 port, and Sony was very gracious to basically like take care of hiring them to do a one-off build for us that has all the sound effects and the players chirping and singing intact, so that we'll be able to play the game where it really is the score live, but everything else is preserved. So we're not just muting the game, because that was the thing where I was like, oh, that would be, now most games, it's no big deal. You just go into the menu and you turn off the music. As much as I have a mixed relationship with the fact that we empower the player to do that, of course it means that when I play games, I'm turning the dialogue and sound effects way down. So it's, you know, I'm a hypocrite, I'm okay with that. But so Journey has no UI whatsoever, and so we had to ask Sony was like, "Are you kidding? That sounds awesome. You know, we'll totally do that." They were very supportive, and I mean, they've been wonderful, you know, through the whole process. I've really loved working with them on Journey all these years, during and after, and so yeah, all that's still there now. The thing that's interesting is there are probably moments where there's something from the score that you didn't realize was part of the score. And so you'll hear an acoustically reinterpreted version of whatever that was. Because I worked really closely with Steve Johnson, the sound designer, and we were sharing files back and forth, and we, like the chirping sounds was a thing that we kicked back and forth over and over, you know, where I would sample, I did samples of a flute player, the cellist, and the singer who sings I Was Born for This. I literally recorded her one note at a time, doing like these like, thing like that, and we built those chirp sounds out of that, and then he would add like birds and things, and we went back and forth, but there's elements that then he'd send me something cool, and I'd like steal it and put it in the score, and so then that had to be reinterpreted, because there's a lot of just kind of like electronics that is just all of these things that are not traditional instruments just fall under that banner, and there's a lot more of it. People think of it as an orchestral score, but it's actually not. It uses orchestral strings, and especially the ending, Apotheosis and I Was Born for This are pretty straightforwardly using the orchestral palette. But there's huge swaths of stuff that are pretty electronic, but it's just a little more subtle because it's not like dubstep or chiptunes or something that's so noticeably electronic. It's much more tucked in there. And some of that is from the sound design, so you'll hear it exactly as you're familiar with it, and then others you'll be like, oh, that French horn with the, stopped French horn is the thing that I thought was sound design, and it was actually in the score. And I like that. I like where you can't really tell where one starts and the other stops.
And it's really important to have that because there's this environmental tonality that's involved in the creation of it, but there's also those powerful things of just like the sound of gliding through the sand. Or the sound at the very end where hopefully we all know what happens, and just that feeling of like crunch. I mean, that you have to have that, and so it was pretty integral.
And Steve put so much time into Foleying the footsteps. I mean,
Yeah.
he
It's
suffered
so
for that
powerful.
because it was like, this is going to be the thing we hear the most. Like, this game is the sound of walking in sand, and so. It was. I remember Genova saying that needs to feel just like it needs to feel good. We have to like that sound because if we don't, we will hate the game because you get a high dose of it. And he did an awesome job,
Yeah.
and so that will definitely be present. Yeah.
Were there any like weird stumbling blocks, like politically or just like in the actual producerial, like putting this together and getting the rights to do whatever and getting permissions to do whatever? Were there any like weird stumbling blocks or anything, or did it all kind of turn out pretty smooth?
It's been amazingly easy. I mean, because it was one of those, like, I'm very protective of Journey because I spent 3 years, like, I wrote that score from the age of 24 to 27. And so in hindsight, I was like, wow, that's like 13% of my entire life by the time I finished it. That was, it was a huge chunk of time that I lived with this thing and was constantly just sure I was about to go flying off a cliff professionally because I just thought no one's gonna get this game and it's gonna be like the most notorious sort of pretentious bullshit that my career's over, But I was like, but I also kind of like where it's like I kind of like what we're doing here, So I was very invested, and then the game had this crazy, astonishing reaction that I find as surreal today as from the first review that I read when it started coming out in 2012. And so I have a very kind of protective, like it's a very special thing in my life. Not my music, but just like the total experience of Journey. And so for me, like sort of hang up number one is I have to hand all this over to someone like Patrick and say, okay, now go and do your thing. But he's brilliant and did an amazing job. And the funny thing is, most of my feedback was like, put more Patrick in this. Like, you don't need to be a slave to what I wrote. Like, let's make this our thing now instead of just my thing.
If you listen to the piano, that's mostly me.
Yes, yes. In the bridge connecting sequence, I feel like you stepped out the most in the end of the ruins.
Yeah.
And what I always thought of as the Iceman scene. You know how Iceman and the X-Men, like, he's making this ice bridge that's like 1 inch in front of him as he's going? That's basically what's happening in Journey. At the very end, when you reach the top of the large vertical section, there's that last little bit where the cloth is kind of flying in from the sides and forming a bridge in front of you as you go, and I always call it the Iceman scene. So Patrick gets a little fancy on the piano there in a way that's really not in the original score, but it really works. It's awesome. And but with like Sony, for example, it was hilarious. Like 6 months into the process, one of the producers who had been helping facilitate the PS4 special build just said, by the way, who approved this? And I was like, you're the only guy I talked to. And he said, oh, well, all right. And he was like, I guess I should send an email. And so then he sent an email and was like, yeah, everyone's cool. And then it was like, as other people started, as we're talking about touring and, there's other entities starting to become involved and and like dollars start to become a little bit more of a thing, you know, then the official channels at Sony were like, okay, I guess we should sort of do this, and then they like sent an email and was like, okay, you're cool. So, I mean, they really, and they're awesome. Like, for example, you'll notice that the score is on YouTube like 1,000 times. There's people who have uploaded, you know, the soundtrack to YouTube that have everywhere from like millions of hits to no hits, because it's just, there's thousands of iterations of it. And Sony never does copyright filing against those people, and certainly not against people that do covers of it and stuff. Like I've always found them to be pretty sort of progressive in that sense of realizing that people make stuff because they're excited and they're passionate, and at best, they're like an extension of your marketing for your game, and at worst, they do no harm.
No.
And so, yeah, there's been zero. I mean, there's been nothing. I've felt awesome about these guys the whole time, obviously. So internally, it's felt. I mean, I don't know how they feel about me. Now's the chance to get it out there.
Get it out.
But I mean, these guys, I think of this is in many ways their baby, this, like, Patrick and Fifth House collectively, because like I said, I've wanted to do this for years, but the massive kind of initial work needed to make this happen, I needed someone else who was willing to do that work, and these guys have done that brilliantly. It would never have happened without them. So that part of it's great, and then Sony basically just was like,
Yeah, and I think Sony, I'm sure, just saw, I mean, they're creating a PlayStation Network. They want to create a network of fans. And what we noticed during the Kickstarter campaign was that the Journey fans themselves have their own network, this unspoken network, if you will. And the support behind it was just completely mind-blowing. So I would have no doubt that Sony sees that potential to expand that network.
yeah, I mean, they didn't expect this at all, but it became one of their like flagship titles. I mean, it's one of those, you know, if you see like a reel of, you know, PlayStation games, they will always prominently feature, you know, they're obviously very proud of The Last of Us, they're very proud of Uncharted, but they put Journey, even though, you know, we had a fraction of the budget of those games, it was supposed to be just a download title. It was part 3 of a 3-game deal with that game company. It was Flow, Flower, and Journey. And it ended up being, you know, like the game of the year everywhere. And yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, exactly. The first week of sales, it like crushed all download title sales records they had ever had. And so they have a lot of pride in it. And I think they should. You know, I think from a developer standpoint, they're tricky to deal with. Like I hear that through the grapevine. My experience was always very positive dealing with their music team, because there's kind of multiple points of interaction, right? But I found them to be amazing. They were very supportive. I mean, they were willing to hire an orchestra for a game that was supposed to just be this like modest little download title. Back then that meant something. Now all games are downloadable. In fact, when's the last time you bought like a boxed game? I haven't in years. They still have it like the awards shows though. Downloadable game of the year. I'm like, what? Like Fallout? that's ridiculous. It used to mean indie. But now you have to have another criteria to judge that. But Journey was one of the last ones of that era of like, this is, you know, you would presume a game to be a box game, and then the smaller, because that was Sony's, I know I'm way off on a tangent here, I'm like miles from your original question, but this is the risk you take to being the 9 people that come to a 10 o'clock panel. When they made their deal with that game company, Sony did something pretty brilliant that Microsoft, and I love those guys, but they actually did miss the boat on this initially with XBLA versus the PlayStation Network, where Sony said, we're going to sell games through an online service that the PS3 is going to be able to just natively wirelessly connect to. Xbox 360 could not do that out of the gate. So they said, what we'll do is we'll be like an incubator of weird talent, because we want to be simultaneously the big burly AAA people that have like Gran Turismo and you know, God of War and later Uncharted, games like that, you know, big like cutting edge AAA titles, but we can also, by selling games online and reducing their overhead massively and having like no distribution costs associated with them as a result, we can make them really inexpensively, which means that they don't need to sell very many copies, and we can like go look for interesting, artsy, weird developers and be this like incubator of talent. They reached out to John Mack and did a game called Everyday Shooter. They made a deal with Genova for the 3-game deal with Genova as a student, which led to Flow Flower and Journey, and I was like, they changed games as a result because they made this haven where you could make a small independent game, but you had like a $2 or $3 million budget instead of your game needs to cost $25 million or more, or like in the case of Uncharted or something, it's like $80 million, or it's $10,000 because it's 3 people in a garage. And there's just no research. They actually created a kind of almost like a middle class. It's been kind of short-lived because we're already in a place where now everyone's saying no one makes games like that anymore, which is slightly overstated. But they kind of changed the industry but they still didn't realize what they had on their hands until suddenly Journey exploded like crazy. Which is still surreal. Very grateful to this day for every detail of it. But yeah, so I'm very grateful for Sony.
Yeah. So maybe one more question?
It's you.
When you're practicing and you find, and you're a musician, you find a spot that's kind of musically bland, and do you like immediately think, I need to improve this? Do I just spontaneously just kind of change it on the spot, or is that kind of something you go home, say, hey, that was really cool practice, but I think I could do better, and just kind of mold it and then bring it to the next practice?
Tell me about all the musically bland moments I've asked you.
I will first say there were really no musically bland moments for this particular one. What's really cool about what we do, especially with new music, and I consider this new music, because it is that the composer's still alive. And so if there's...
Only technically.
Technically speaking, his heart's beating. Yeah. So what's so cool is that like if I see a particular part and I question like, what can I do to this? If I'm not coming up with anything, I could go ask him. We go hop on Facebook and say, what can we do here? Again, with this particular score, we didn't have that problem because there's already so much to it, and the way that Patrick arranged it, it's all right in front of us. And so as musicians, it's just then take what's in the black and white and make that as interesting as I possibly can. But in this particular case, it was all there for us.
I think it's a good question, though, hypothetically.
Yeah.
Like repertoire music, for example. I mean, what do you do in those cases?
I mean, for me, I like to think, if I'm in the audience, I like to assume that no one knows anything about the music that I'm going to play. And I want them to remember something. Whatever it is, I want them to remember something from my performance. So they're not just like, I listened to that thing, I'm going to go home now, whatever. Even if it's something that's really over the top and overdone and kind of ham-fisted, I want someone to know that I was doing something to try to bring them in. And I think that's like, I can identify a moment that like, this is the poop your pants moment, we call it. PYP for short, so that people don't know what we're talking about. But so here's this thing that I want to do. What can we do to make that as powerful as possible, or as meaningful as possible, or as subdued as possible, whatever we decide. I like to look for at least one. And in here, thankfully, there are like over 1,000 moments where that happens. And this was a case where I think we had to decide, we had to figure out where those big moments were, because since we're not looking at the game the whole time, we don't know exactly where those things are lining up. But thankfully, when a conductor comes in who's looking at the screen or who knows the game really well, they can kind of do that for us. Because this is such a different experience where score study involves playing the game, watching the game, understanding the game, and looking at the music. I think it's a lot different experience from that perspective, that the conductor brings that to the table for us to identify those moments.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that we have as musicians is that too often our training is read the black and white and just perform the black and white as accurately as possible, make sure it's in tune and in time. But what people forget to do is create a musical narrative. And again, in this case, we already have the narrative. Like when I'm playing anywhere in this music, I'm seeing the game, even though it's not in front of me. I am seeing the game, so I can draw that narrative fairly easily. But when you aren't given that, what you do is you have to create one. So for instance, when we were playing the Shostakovich string quartet, at one point in this movement, we said, what is this? Like, what can we draw from? And at one point, our violinist was like, this reminds me of a grizzly bear juggling and riding a unicycle. And that sounds absolutely ridiculous. But all of a sudden now I have this mental image, and when we're playing this, it's like, okay, now it's ridiculous and fun, but big and burly, and hopefully now we can convey this mental image that we have, this narrative that we've built to our audience, and they get that same kind of feeling that we now have.
Yeah, and a lot of our concerts have that narrative element to them inherently, where we'll do something with a graphic novelist or with an artist or some other medium that's not just music-based. So there is that like storytelling element to a lot of our work that we do.
Yeah, that's basically our mission statement at this point is, and we've been doing it since our inception, 2005. That, as he mentioned, we worked with a graphic novelist to create an original 3-part graphic novel series based off of chamber music that we gave him. You know, we've worked with actors, and this was just kind of like the next evolution in that process, and so that's why we're honored to do it. But,
Yeah, they're way cooler than most traditional classical musicians.
well, thank you all very much. I know you want to get out of here, but make sure you bring everybody
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah. Really appreciate your coming to our nerdy chamber music panel.
And please find us after or even right now, and we're happy to talk to you anytime. Thank you.